Hello again and welcome back. This is Catherine Morgan-Nance. In part 3 of our video series about decision making, we'll determine which types of costs are relevant in the decision to make a product or purchase it from a supplier. Avoidable costs and opportunity cost are considered. Sometimes it's advantageous to outsource the manufacture of a product rather than making it ourselves. Before making the decision to buy the product from a supplier, managers must compare the relevant cost of buying the product with the relevant manufacturing cost that can be avoided by buying the part. As we discussed in an earlier video, opportunity costs may be relevant in decision making and should also be considered. A simple example of an opportunity cost is the lost wages and vacation time you incur if you decide to go to college full-time. When facing a make or buy decision, companies should consider options for the factory space used to make the product they are considering buying. Perhaps they can rent out the space to another company, or they can make a different product that has a higher segment margin. If they can use the factory space for something else, an opportunity cost exists that is equal to the segment margin of the alternative use of the space. We might think about it this way. Building rental income for gone is an opportunity cost of continuing to manufacture the product. If an opportunity cost is identified, it should be added to the relevant cost of continuing to make the part. Then you'd compare the cost of buying the part with the relevant cost associated with manufacturing the part and make a decision. You'd select the alternative that is the least costly. A version of make or buy is the decision to replace or keep equipment. We'll talk about these types of decisions more when we discuss capital budgeting. For now, just remember that the relevant costs are the differences between alternatives and that sunk costs are always irrelevant. When we make a decision, we'll pick the alternative that yields the lowest costs or the highest net operating income. Next, we'll review an example of a company that is evaluating whether to continue to make a component part for its engine or whether to buy the part for $35 from an outside supplier. Once again, relevant costs are identified. This time they include avoidable and opportunity costs. The first scenario will be straightforward. The second scenario will include opportunity cost related to the alternative use of a facility. See you in the next video where we use an Excel spreadsheet to calculate our numbers.
Hello, this is Catherine Morgan-Nance. Let's continue our discussion about whether to make or buy a component part with this example. Toledo Engines has always produced all of the necessary parts for the engines it makes, including an oil pump. An outside supplier has offered to sell the pump to Toledo Engines for $35 per pump, and information related to the cost of producing the pumps follows. We can see here that we have a list of the different types of costs to manufacture the pump and the cost per unit for each of those. We also have the total cost that the company has aggregated at a level of production of 15,000 units per year. The question, of course, will be, can we buy these oil pumps for cheaper than we can continue to make them? The first thing we need to do, as you've learned, is decide which of these costs are relevant. Direct materials, direct labor, and variable manufacturing overhead are variable with respect to production, meaning if we don't produce these oil pumps, we will not incur those costs. But if we do produce them, we will incur those costs. So if we buy the oil pumps from the outside supplier, then we will avoid the variable manufacturing overhead cost and the direct material costs and the direct labor cost. Therefore, these first three types of cost are relevant because they are avoidable. Now, what about fixed manufacturing overhead that is traceable? Well, we've learned previously that certain types of traceable fixed cost are relevant to making decisions. Let's take a look at the asterisk on these. A third of these traceable fixed costs are supervisory salaries, but two-thirds of the cost are depreciation, and that depreciation is on equipment that has no resale value. So as we've learned in previous videos, the depreciation is not a relevant cost because it's effectively sunk. However, the one-third of supervisory salaries is relevant. And I've typed in one-third of that cost is relevant because it's avoidable. What about fixed manufacturing overhead that's allocated? We have $135,000 or $9 per unit. That's a allocated cost. What have we learned about that? Well, we've learned that allocated overheads don't go away just because we stop making a product. In this case, we will continue to incur those costs, and therefore those costs are not relevant to our decision about whether to make or buy this product. Let's change up the facts for a minute. Assume the company has no alternative use for the facilities that are used to produce the oil pumps. Compute the total relevant cost of making and buying the pumps, and should the company buy the parts from the supplier. First, let's identify the differential cost per unit of making the part versus buying the part, and I'll expand the screen so we can see what those costs are. Let's go step by step through each of these lines on the second table here on the screen. If we were to buy the units, the oil pumps from the outside supplier, it would cost us $35 per unit. And multiplying that by 15,000 units, we come up with 525,000. Now, the relevant cost of continuing to make the oil pump include the costs that we would avoid if we were to buy the oil pump from the outside supplier. So they include direct materials of $14 per pump, or $210,000 in total. They include direct labor of $10 per pump, or $150,000 in total. And they include variable manufacturing overhead of $3 per pump, or $45,000 in total. Now remember, the only portion of the traceable fixed manufacturing overhead that is relevant is the one-third that is related to supervisory salaries. So we will multiply the fixed manufacturing overhead that is traceable of $6 times one-third to come up with $2 per unit that is relevant in this decision. Those would be the costs that would be avoided if we were to buy this oil pump somewhere else. So in total, we have $30,000 in relevant traceable fixed manufacturing overheads that would be avoided. What would your decision be? You would evaluate the cost of buying the pump outside, $35 per pump, with the cost that you could avoid if you bought the pump outside, and you would avoid only $29 in cost. Your company will benefit by $6 per pump, the difference between $35 and $29, if you decide to continue to make the pumps. And in fact, from a total standpoint, is $90,000. You'll make $90,000 more in net operating income if you continue to make the pump versus buying the pumps outside. In our final scenario, let's assume the company can rent the facilities that are used to produce the oil pumps for $120,000 per year. And let's recompute the total relevant cost of making and buying the pumps and decide whether we still feel that the company should buy the parts from the supplier like we did a moment ago. On the screen, you see a summary of where we left off with the last example, except now we have to consider rental of this facility. If we buy the parts, we can rent the facilities. If we don't buy the parts outside, we can't rent the facilities. So the rental income foregone is considered an opportunity cost of continuing to make the pumps. We will add this cost, $120,000, to the $435,000 worth of avoidable cost. That means if we continue to make the product, the relevant cost that we should be considering is $555,000 versus $525,000 to buy the product from an outside supplier. This doesn't look so good anymore, does it? So does our decision change? I believe our decision now will be to buy those parts from the outside supplier. The cost to us of continuing to make the part, $555,000, versus the cost of buying the part, $525,000, is a $30,000 differential. We'd be better off by $30,000 to buy the pumps from the supplier.
This concludes our discussion about the decision whether to make or buy a component. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. See you soon.